You've heard the name Dracula, a creature of the night with fangs and a cape. But what if I told you the real man was 1,000 times more terrifying than any vampire? His story isn't about bats or sleeping in coffins. It's about a world of fire and blood, a prince who was given to his enemies as a child and who returned to his homeland to unleash a terror so complete, so horrifying, that the stories they told about him turned him into a legend. We're going to pull back the curtain on the myth and find the man. But be warned, what we find is not a hero. We are going to explore how a boy prince became a monster, why he skewered thousands of people on giant spikes, and how he fought an empire and won for a time. This is the true story of Vlad III, the man they called the Impaler. A world of blood and empires. To understand the monster, you first have to understand the world that made him. Picture Europe in the 1400s. It wasn't a nice place. It was a chaotic, messy, and violent time. Kings and princes fought constantly over tiny patches of land. Life was cheap, and death was everywhere. Now, imagine a small land called Wallachia. Today, it's part of Romania. Back then, it was a tiny little country with a huge problem. It was stuck between two superpowers. On one side, you had the Kingdom of Hungary, a big Christian power. On the other side, you had the Ottoman Empire, a massive and expanding Muslim empire, led by a powerful sultan. Wallachia was like a small boat caught in a storm between two giant warships. The Prince of Wallachia had to be very smart, very tough, and very, very careful. He had to play both sides, making deals with Hungary while also paying money or tribute to the Ottoman Sultan to keep him from invading. It was a constant balancing act. One wrong move and your country could be wiped off the map. This was the world Vlad was born into. A world where your neighbors didn't just want to beat you, they wanted to swallow you whole. The ruler of Wallachia at the time was a man named Vlad II. He was a skilled knight and a member of a special group created by the King of Hungary. This group was called the Order of the Dragon. Its job was to defend Christianity from the Ottoman Empire. Because he was in this order, Vlad II was given the name Dracula, which meant the dragon. It was a name of honor, but in the local language, Romanian, Dracula could also mean the devil. This little mix-up in meaning would become much more important later on. So Vlad II, or Vlad Dracula, was the prince. In 1431, he had a son. He named him Vlad, too. This son is the one we're interested in, because his father was Dracula, the dragon. People called the young boy Dracula, which simply meant son of the dragon. At the time, it was just a name, like being called Johnson because your dad's name is John, a childhood forged in a cage. Being a prince in Wallachia was not easy. Vlad Dracula the father, was trying to keep his country safe. He made a deal with the Ottoman Sultan. The Sultan agreed to support him as the ruler of Wallachia, but the Sultan didn't trust him completely. To make sure Vlad Dracula would always be loyal, the Sultan demanded something terrible. He wanted 2 of Vlad's sons as hostages. This was a common practice back then. If you gave your sons to your enemy, you were less likely to attack them because they could harm your children. So, in 1442, when young Vlad was only about 11 years old, he and his younger brother, Radu, were sent to the Ottoman Empire as prisoners. Imagine being 11 years old. You're a prince living in a castle, and one day you are taken from your home and sent to live with your greatest enemies. You have no idea if you will ever see your father or your homeland again. This experience changed Vlad forever. It filled him with a deep, burning anger. He and his brother Radu were treated very differently. Radu was handsome and charming. He got along with the Ottomans. He became good friends with the Sultan's son, a young man who would later become one of the most powerful rulers in the world, Sultan Mehmed II, the man who would conquer Constantinople. Radu eventually even converted to Islam and became a commander in the Ottoman army. He chose to join his captors. Vlad was the opposite. He was stubborn, angry, and proud. He hated the Ottomans. He hated being a prisoner. He was reportedly whipped and punished for his bad attitude. For years, he was surrounded by the culture, the language, and the military tactics of the very people he saw as his country's destroyers. He didn't just learn to hate them, he learned from them. He saw how they ruled, how they fought, and how they used fear as a weapon. He especially learned about their favorite and most terrifying method of execution: impalement. This is where a person is forced onto a long, sharp wooden stake. The stake is then raised upright, and the person's own weight slowly pulls them down, causing the stake to pierce through their body. It was a slow, agonizing, and public way to die, designed to create maximum terror. Vlad saw this, and he never forgot it. These years as a hostage were not just a prison for him, they were his school. He was learning lessons in cruelty that he would one day bring back home. The dragon's son fights for his throne. While Vlad was a prisoner, things back in Wallachia went from bad to worse. His father, Vlad Dracula, was betrayed and killed. His older brother was captured by rival nobles, blinded with a hot poker, and buried alive. At just 17 years old, Vlad learned that his family had been destroyed. His whole world was gone. The Ottoman Sultan saw an opportunity. He decided to put the young, angry Vlad on the throne of Wallachia. The Sultan thought that since he was putting Vlad in power, Vlad would be his loyal puppet. In 1448, Vlad became the Prince of Wallachia for the first time. But it didn't last long. The Hungarian kingdom backed a different person for the throne. After only 2 months, Vlad was forced to run away. He had the throne, and he lost it. For the next 8 years, Vlad was a wanderer. He went to different kingdoms, trying to find allies, trying to find someone who would help him reclaim his birthright. This was a hard time for him. He had no power, no home, and very few friends. But it made him even more determined. He was planning. He was waiting. He promised himself that if he ever got the throne back, he would never ever lose it again. And he would punish everyone who had ever wronged him and his family. Finally, in 1456, his chance came. The political situation changed. Hungary was now willing to support him. With their help, Vlad marched into Wallachia again. This time, he was successful. He killed the man who had taken his throne and became the ruler. Vlad III, son of the dragon, Dracula, was now in charge, and he was about to unleash all the anger and lessons in cruelty that had been building up inside him since he was a boy. Wallachia was about to learn what true fear felt like. The Impaler's reign of terror. Vlad's main goal was to make his country strong and to secure his own power. Wallachia was full of powerful nobles called boyars. These were rich families who were often disloyal. They made deals with the Hungarians or the Ottomans, and they cared more about their own wealth than about the country. They were the same people who had betrayed and killed his father and brother. Vlad knew he couldn't trust them, so he decided to get rid of them. One of his most famous stories happened on Easter Sunday. He invited all the powerful boyar families to a great feast at his court. He asked them how many different princes they had lived under. The boyars, trying to show how old and important their families were, started bragging. One said he had served under 5 princes. Another said 7. They were admitting, right to Vlad's face, that they were constantly switching sides and betraying their rulers. Vlad's face grew dark. He had heard enough. He had his soldiers lock the doors. All the older boyars, the ones who had bragged, were arrested right there at the dinner table. They were taken outside and impaled on stakes in front of the castle. Hundreds of them. He then looked at the younger, stronger boyars and their families. He didn't kill them. He had a different plan. He marched them 50 miles away to a ruined castle in the mountains. He forced them to work as slaves, rebuilding the castle with their bare hands. They worked day and night in rags until they died from exhaustion. The castle they built is known today as Poenari Castle, or the real Castle Dracula. This was the message Vlad sent to anyone who thought about challenging him. He wasn't just going to kill you. He was going to do it in a horrible way, and he would destroy your entire family. The message was clear. Loyalty to me is the only way to survive. A land of no crime. Vlad didn't just use this cruelty on the nobles. He wanted to bring absolute order to his entire country. He hated crime and dishonesty. He believed that for Wallachia to be strong, it had to be a land of perfect law and order. His methods for achieving this were extreme. He declared war on all thieves, beggars, and liars. The punishment for almost any crime was impalement. If a merchant was caught cheating a customer, he was impaled. If a woman was unfaithful to her husband, she was punished horribly, sometimes by having her skin cut off, and then she was impaled. If a thief was caught, they were impaled. The stories of his justice spread like wildfire. One story tells of a foreign merchant who visited Vlad's capital city, Târgoviște. The merchant had a cart full of gold coins. He was worried about being robbed, so he told Vlad. Vlad told him to leave the cart in the middle of the street overnight and promised that nothing would happen to it. The merchant was terrified, but he did as the prince said. The next morning, he went to his cart. All the gold was still there. He counted it carefully and realized that one single gold coin was missing. He went to Vlad and told him. Vlad said, "Go back and count again. The coin has been returned." The merchant went back, and sure enough, the missing coin was there. Then Vlad told him, "You should know that I had the thief caught and impaled. If you had not reported the missing coin, I would have had you impaled right next to him." Another famous story, maybe a legend, but one that shows his reputation, is about the golden cup. Vlad placed a cup made of solid gold by a well in the town square. Anyone, even the poorest person, could use it to drink water. The rule was that it must be left there for everyone to use. During his entire reign, the golden cup was never stolen. No one dared to touch it. People were so afraid of Vlad that they would rather die of thirst than risk the punishment for stealing. He created a land with almost no crime. But he did it by making everyone live in constant, paralyzing fear. He wasn't just a ruler, he was a walking terror. The Sultan's nightmare. For a few years, Vlad focused on cleaning up his own country. He paid his tribute money to the Ottoman Sultan, Mehmed II. Remember him? He was the childhood friend of Vlad's brother, Radu. He was now the powerful ruler who had conquered the great city of Constantinople. But Vlad was just buying time. He was building his army and strengthening his castles. He had no intention of being a servant to the Ottomans forever. The hate he had for them from his childhood was still there. In 1549, he felt he was ready. He stopped paying the tribute money. The Sultan sent some envoys or messengers to ask why. When the messengers came before Vlad, they refused to take off their turbans, their traditional headwear, saying it was their custom. Vlad said he would be happy to help them strengthen their custom. He had their turbans nailed to their heads with small spikes. Then he sent them back to the Sultan. This was a declaration of war. Sultan Mehmed was furious. In the winter of 1642, he gathered a massive army. Some sources say it was over 60,000 soldiers, one of the largest armies in the world at the time. It was a huge, modern army with powerful cannons. Vlad's army was tiny in comparison. maybe around 20,000 to 30,000 men. He couldn't possibly win a direct fight. So Vlad decided not to fight fair. He used what we would now call guerrilla warfare. His small, fast-moving armies would hide in the forests and mountains. They would launch surprise attacks on the Ottoman soldiers. He poisoned wells so the Ottoman army would have no water. He burned villages in their path so they would have no food or shelter. He did everything he could to harass, weaken, and demoralize the giant army. The night attack. Vlad's most daring move was the famous night attack. He knew exactly where the Sultan's personal tent was located in the massive Ottoman camp. One night, dressed as an Ottoman soldier, Vlad himself led a small force of his best men right into the heart of the enemy camp. Their goal was to kill the Sultan in his sleep. This would throw the entire Ottoman army into chaos. They rode through the camp, slashing and killing Ottoman soldiers in the dark. There was panic everywhere. The Ottomans started fighting each other in the confusion, thinking they were being attacked by a much larger force. Vlad and his men fought their way towards the Sultan's tent, creating a path of destruction, but they couldn't find it in the dark and chaos. They ended up attacking the tents of two of the Sultan's top generals instead. Even though they failed to kill the Sultan, the attack was a huge psychological victory. Vlad and his men escaped into the night, leaving behind a terrified and confused army. They had shown the Sultan that nowhere was safe. The prince of this tiny land was not afraid to ride into the heart of his empire and attack him personally. The forest of the impaled. After the night attack, the Sultan pushed on, determined to crush Vlad and capture his capital city. As the Ottoman army marched closer, they came to a valley just outside the city, and what they saw there stopped the entire army in its tracks. It was a sight so horrible that it has been remembered for over 500 years, stretching for miles as far as the eye could see. Vlad had taken around 20,000 Ottoman prisoners and Turkish people living in the area, and he had impaled every single one of them. Men, women, and even children. The stakes were arranged in rows, like a grotesque garden. The tallest stake in the center was reserved for the highest-ranking captured Ottoman officer. Birds had made nests in their bodies. The smell was unimaginable. This was pure, calculated, psychological warfare. It was not just killing, it was a message. Vlad was telling the Sultan, "This is what I do to my enemies. This is the fate that awaits you and your entire army if you continue." Even Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror, a man who had seen countless battles and sieges, was shocked. His own historians wrote that the Sultan was stunned by the sight. He said that he could not take the land from a man who did such things. The will of the Ottoman army was broken. The sight of this man-made hell was too much. They turned around. Vlad, the prince of a tiny nation, had defeated the massive army of the Ottoman Empire without even having a major battle. he had won using pure terror. This event is what truly earned him his nickname, Vlad the Impaler. Betrayal and a black legend. Vlad had saved his country from the Ottomans, but his story was far from over. The Sultan didn't give up. Instead of attacking again, he used a different strategy. He decided to support Vlad's own brother, Radu the Handsome, to be the new prince of Wallachia. Radu, who had grown up with the Ottomans and was loyal to them, led an army into Wallachia. He promised the boyars peace and stability. Many of the Wallachian nobles were tired of Vlad's constant war and his brutal rule. They started to abandon Vlad and join his brother. At the same time, Vlad needed help from his Christian ally, the King of Hungary, Matthias Corvinus. He went, but instead of getting help, Vlad was betrayed. King Matthias had his own political reasons for wanting Vlad out of the way. He arrested Vlad and threw him in prison. To justify imprisoning the man who was famous for fighting the Ottomans, the Hungarian king started a massive propaganda campaign against him. This is a very important part of the story. The stories of Vlad's cruelty, which were true, were now exaggerated and spread all over Europe, especially in Germany. The brand new invention of the printing press was used to print pamphlets and books with horrible stories about Vlad. These were the first horror bestsellers in history. They had terrifying titles like The Frightening and Shocking Story of the Bloodthirsty Madman Vlad Dracula. They were filled with woodcut images showing Vlad feasting among the bodies of his impaled victims, or boiling people alive, or forcing mothers to eat their own children. Some of these stories were likely true, but many were completely made up or wildly exaggerated. They were designed to make Vlad look like a demonic monster, not a Christian prince fighting for his land. These German stories are where we get the idea that he enjoyed dining among the dead, and that he dipped his bread in the blood of his victims. There is no real historical proof for this, but the stories were so powerful that people believed them. This was the beginning of his legend. He was no longer just a cruel ruler. He was becoming something inhuman. Vlad spent about 12 years as a prisoner in Hungary. It was a much more comfortable prison than the one he had in the Ottoman Empire as a child. After more than a decade, the political situation changed once more. The Hungarians needed a strong warrior to put back on the throne of Wallachia, to fight the still-growing Ottoman threat. Their old enemy, Vlad the Impaler, was suddenly useful again. In 1476, he was released. With Hungarian support, he marched into Wallachia for a third time and took the throne back. He was finally home, finally the prince again. But this time, it was very short-lived. Only a few months after his return, he rode out to fight yet another battle against an Ottoman army. And in that battle, he was killed. No one knows for sure how he died. Some say he was killed by the Turks. Others say he was assassinated by some of his own Wallachian boyars who were still afraid of him. One story says he was accidentally killed by one of his own men after being mistaken for a Turk. What we do know is that the Ottomans cut off his head. They preserved it in honey and sent it to the Sultan in Constantinople. The Sultan had the head displayed on a spike as final proof that the Impaler, the nightmare of the Ottoman army, was finally dead. His body was supposedly buried in a monastery near Bucharest. But when archaeologists opened his grave centuries later, it was empty. To this day, nobody knows for sure where the body of the real Dracula lies. His death is as mysterious as his life was brutal. How a prince became a vampire. So, how did this real-life medieval prince, a brutal but also complex historical figure, turn into a fictional, blood-sucking vampire in a cape? For centuries, Vlad the Impaler was mostly remembered in Romania as a national hero. Yes, he was cruel, but he was seen as a strong ruler who fought for his people's independence and brought order to the land. The horror stories about him were mostly forgotten outside of Germany and Russia. Then, in the late 1800s, an Irish writer named Bram Stoker was looking for a location for his new Gothic horror novel. He was reading a history book about Eastern Europe and came across a small footnote about a 15th century Wallachian prince who was called Dracula and who fought against the Turks. The book also mentioned that Dracula in the local language meant devil. That was it. That was all he needed. Stoker didn't know much about the real Vlad. He didn't know about the impalement, the night attack, or the forest of the impaled. He just liked the name Dracula and the mysterious, faraway setting of Transylvania and Romania. He combined that name with local vampire myths and legends that had nothing to do with Vlad the Impaler. These were old folk tales about undead spirits that came back from the grave to drink the blood of the living. Stoker mixed the name of a real person with the folklore of a monster. And in 1897, his novel, Dracula, was published. The book created a brand new character, Count Dracula, the elegant, aristocratic vampire from Transylvania. And that fictional character became so famous that he completely replaced the real person in the popular imagination. The real history of the Son of the Dragon was buried under the pop culture legend of the King of the Vampires. So, was Vlad the Impaler a monster? Yes, by our standards today, his actions were monstrous. He was a mass murderer who used unimaginable cruelty to achieve his goals. But was he a hero? To many Romanians, he was. He was a patriot who did terrible things to save his country from being destroyed by a much larger enemy. The truth is, he was a product of his time, a dark, violent, and brutal time. He was a prince who learned about cruelty from his enemies and then used it better than they ever could. He was a man so terrifying that his enemies turned him into a monster in their stories. And a writer, centuries later, accidentally made that monster immortal. The real story is not about fangs and bats. It's about power, fear, and how far one man would go to protect his land. A story, in many ways, more shocking than any fiction. If you think Vlad's story was wild, wait until you see what happened with the ruthless queen who inspired the tale of Snow White.